I wanted to share about 3 people and throughout my talk. And the first is about a young boy who grew up in Asia, and he loved to play cricket. In fact, he wanted to play professionally. He wasn't really into academics very much. But eventually, academics did kind of replace his passion for cricket. He ended up falling in love with computers. And so he ended up getting his early education in electrical engineering. But he really wasn't sure what he wanted to do next. His father encouraged him to get out of his hometown. He was like, you need to move away. You need to get out of our country. So he actually came to the US, like many of you, for school. And he got his master's degree in computer science. And then he ended up getting his MBA from University of Chicago. Then kind of as a result of being in the right place at the right time, he ended up getting a job at a huge tech powerhouse company. And as the company grew, he also rose through the ranks for 22 years. And he ended up being the CEO of that company. So it's kind of a great story. It almost sounds a little bit like a fairy tale. Do you know who I'm talking about? Satya Nadella. He's the CEO of Microsoft. And I want to talk about him a little bit because his story contains really powerful lessons for us. Even though he is an Indian American and not a Chinese American like us, like and I was warned about some of the sensitivities between Indian and Chinese immigrants, so I understand that. But I think we can learn something from him. We can also learn from him, even if we don't work for a tech company or if we don't aspire to become the CEO of the company. But through his life, he's learned some valuable lessons that I think we can learn as well. And so I will come back and share with you more about his story later. But I think that his story is about thriving in business. And I think it's safe to say that that is the goal that we all share. We all want to thrive. And what I mean by thrive, it can mean different things to different people, but it probably means security and stability. We don't want to have to worry about the future and how we're going to provide for ourselves or our families. Thriving also means achievement and enjoyment, meaning that we want to do important work and we want to enjoy doing it. And thriving also means becoming a leader in some capacity. And I know that leadership can mean different things to different people as well, so I want to make sure that I define when I say leadership or a leader, I'm talking about someone who influences other people. Now, that influence can be positive or it can be negative, but clearly influence is a choice. You would decide whether or not you're going to influence people and whether or not you're going to influence them positively. So leadership is not necessarily a formal role or comes with an official title. There are leaders at all levels within an organization, in all areas of an organization. You can be a project or a team leader. You can be a technical expert or a subject matter expert. Or you can become a people manager or maybe a top executive at the company. But you don't have to be at the top of the company to be a leader. And in fact, if you think about the companies that you work for, you probably already know this to be true. The leaders in the company aren't necessarily not limited to the CEO. They are the people who maybe the CEO listens to, but they may just be someone in some other role. They may be the person that you need to get behind you if you want to succeed. They may be the person that you go to when you really want to know what's going on in your organization. So that's what leadership looks like. And leadership exists in business as well as other fields, doctors, nurses, teachers, lawyers, government officials, community leaders, coaches. You can be a leader in your family, among your friends, in your social group, a church group. So you can be a leader in all areas of your life. Today, we are going to focus on being a leader in business. And we want to explore how to become a great leader, how to have great influence on the people around you, because that is a key aspect to that thriving that I just talked about, that goal that we all share. But I need to start by acknowledging that trying to get to this goal of thriving is difficult. Not everyone is successful at thriving. One big reason is the expectations that other people have of us. You know, we might feel pressure from our parents to be something that we're not. You know, it's a well-known fact that according to be acceptable to Chinese parents, you have to be either a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And I know that some of you are engineers, but not all of you are, right? You might be challenged by expectations from your friends. You know, your Chinese friends may expect you to stay the same as you were since when you were growing up. Your American friends may expect you to become exactly like them. Your coworkers and other people here in the US might apply to you this model minority myth. I don't know if you've heard of this, but the model minority is kind of a stereotype that people put on Asian Americans or Asians like us. They think that we are all polite and well-behaved and reserved, and that we have achieved some sense of success better than the general population or other immigrants. And if you don't fit into that mold, people don't understand you. They just don't get you, right? We also are challenged by the expectations we have of ourselves. You know, we might have created stories in our head about what we think our lives are supposed to be like, or what we are supposed to have achieved by now, or some random point in the future. And we don't understand ourselves when we don't fit into that mold. So the expectations that others and we have on ourselves challenge our ability to thrive. And then there are challenges due to the differences in culture. The culture here in the US, and particularly here in the Bay Area, for those of you who live and work here, it is probably very different from where you grew up. People here have different styles, different values, different ways of doing things, and sometimes it's hard to know what is the culturally appropriate thing to do, much less to actually do it. And so there are a lot of challenges to this goal of thriving. And to overcome those challenges, I usually see people do one of three things. So to overcome the challenges to thriving, some people just try to work harder. You know, they kind of put their shoulder to the grindstone, try to do more work, better work, just kind of work down all those challenges. But the problem with working harder is that it leads to burnout. And burnout is not just being tired. I think, you know, we all are tired. But burnout is really like this complete exhaustion, emotional, mental, physical. And that leads to all sorts of health challenges. And it also affects the quality of your life, your performance, your relationships. So working harder to try to adjust the challenges you face doesn't work. Other people, when they try to adjust the challenges that you face, will just kind of try to bide their time and wait for things to get better. But let's call it what it is. Waiting is really doing nothing. And as one of my colleagues says, given the pace in the business world today, if you are just standing still, you are actually falling behind. So you can't afford just to wait for the challenges to go away. nor can you hope, which is what a lot of people also do, which is just kind of hope that some things are going to change, that miraculously things will just get better, the challenges will be addressed, or somehow you will figure out the way to overcome them. But hope is not a strategy. And the only thing that hope produces is delusionment. So if we face these serious challenges to thriving, and yet thriving is our goal, and our current attempts to overcome those challenges doesn't work, then what are we supposed to do, right? That's what we're here to talk about today. And I want to share with you some suggestions for that. But before I get into that, I want to assure you that I can relate to these challenges that I've just been talking about that you probably face. Now, I may not share your history. It's probably clear by now that I was born and raised here in the US. Like I said, I don't speak any Chinese. And so I haven't faced the same challenges that you have coming to the US. But I've certainly faced challenges in adapting to different cultural aspects. And that brings me to the second person who I want to talk about. That's myself. So I grew up living the model minority myth that I just talked about. This is a picture of my family, and that's me when I was a little kid. So I was this model minority. I was a straight A student. I took piano lessons, right? My parents were proud of me. My teachers loved me. Everyone else, not so much. I was born and raised in the Midwest, in St. Louis, Missouri, and I just really never fit in. I was kind of a geek, and yeah, I was never really popular. I did go to Northwestern University, and even though I did not become an engineer myself, I did marry one, so that was good. And I got a great job out of undergrad, so I thought I was well positioned to thrive in business. But the transition going from school to the corporate world was jarring to me. I was used to being one of the best in my class, getting great reviews from my teachers. But when I went to go work for this large company, that didn't seem to matter. I was just one of many people who were vying for my boss's attention. And even though I was working really hard, other people seemed to be just as, if not more, successful than me. And even though I got a glowing performance review after my first year of work, after my second year, when my boss gave me some less than positive feedback about my interactions with my coworkers, I was crushed. I remember practically bursting into tears, which was incredibly embarrassing, right? I didn't understand that my success was not only going to be based on the quality of my work, but also I needed to develop healthy, productive bonds with other people. And that was a huge wake-up call that I had to work really hard to address. The other major cultural challenge to thriving in business that I faced was when I moved from San Diego to New York. This was after a few years of working in corporate America, and so I thought I knew how to play the game. But moving from what was then a fairly kind of comfortable and laid-back California town to the uptight and always-on culture of New York City really threw me off. I worked at an advertising agency, and everyone there was frankly very arrogant and competitive and judgmental. And everything I did was scrutinized down to what I wore. And I couldn't believe that it mattered what I looked like or what I dressed, how I dressed. And I was kind of upset because I couldn't afford to buy designer clothes, and I didn't want to spend money on designer clothes. And yet I felt like I needed to somehow understand that that was an expectation. And so it took me a long time to address that challenge to thriving in that different culture. The last culture shock that I'll share with you happened more recently. You see, after 25 years or so working in the business world, and working and speaking to organizations like these that are on the left, I decided to start up a Christian nonprofit organization, kind of as a side hustle. And my organization, which is called the Bay Area Center for Faith, Work, and Tech, helps Christian business people live out their spiritual faith in their professional lives. And so I'm really passionate about the work. And so actually over the last 5 years, I've been working more and more on what is supposed to be the side hustle than I have been in the business world. And it's been a real blessing to me, but it's also been a real challenge. For one, in the business world, I've been so used to driving for results that in my new organization, I was focused on our performance and scaling our impact. And I realized, or I've come to realize, that in the nonprofit world, especially a faith-based nonprofit, that those things come a lot more slowly and they're harder to achieve, and frankly, they're less valued. What's important to our mission is cultivating relationships and being cooperative, collaborative, patient, inclusive. And as I've struggled to adapt to these cultural differences, I've had conflicts with my board, with my partners, with even some of the people that I'm trying to serve in my organization. So all of this is to say that I understand the kinds of challenges that you might be facing in terms of finding myself in different cultures. And I've had to learn some hard lessons and understand the consequences of not adapting to the cultural norms around me. And just to ensure that we're all on the same page, when I use this term cultural norm, I mean the shared expectations and standards that guide people's behavior within social groups. Basically, a cultural norm is the way things people do around you. And I've found that adhering to past cultural norms has held me back from thriving. And I would like you to consider whether holding on to your past cultural norms has also held you back from your thriving. Has it held you back from achieving the leadership that you desire? And I'm guessing it has, at least for some of you, in part because of conversations I've had with many of my friends who are first-generation Chinese immigrants, including my friend Yali. And she's the third person who I want to share about. Yali was born and raised in China. She came to the US, got her master's as well as her doctorate from Columbia University. She started working here as an intern at IBM, and then she transferred to a $5 billion software company. So she's currently a UX designer. And I asked her about her experience working in corporate America, and she told me about the struggles she's had with the different cultural norms that she's faced. And so I'm going to share with you some of what she has described to me, as well as what I have observed on my own. And as I go through these different norms, I'd like you to think about whether you have observed or experienced any of these yourself. Now, of course, different companies have different cultural norms, so these are just generalizations, but I want you to see if any of these seem familiar to you. So, for example, leadership in corporate America is less objective and results-based and more political and perception-based. So for example, Yali told me that, she was used to just kind of being super hardworking, kind of like I was in my first job, and she wasn't really focused on talking about what she was doing or the results that she was producing. But she's explained that she's found that you can't just put your head down and wait for people to notice you and your work. If you want to move into greater influence and leadership, you have to actively shape people's perceptions of you. You have to work the system. You have to advocate for yourself, and you have to get others to advocate for you. Doing this is not a distraction from the work that you're supposed to do. It's part of the work you're supposed to do if you want to be given leadership opportunities. Both Yali and I have found that power in corporate America is less hierarchical, meaning less top-down and based on an org chart, and more relational. You can't assume that you're going to have power just because you have a certain title or a certain role or that certain people report to you. You have to earn people's trust and respect, and then they will allow you to influence and lead them. And because this doesn't, or at least probably for you, or it doesn't for me, come naturally, we have to learn how to do this. So to gain this understanding, Yali has found it helpful to cultivate relationships with mentors. You know, people who will guide her, share from her similar experiences, give her constructive feedback so she can learn how to do this. As well as she sought out advocates and sponsors. Sponsors are people who will help her get what she wants and needs. They'll recommend her for opportunities, promote you to others. And so we need to be cultivating relationships with mentors and advocates and sponsors. But this takes wisdom to identify the right people. It takes savvy to know how to engage them. Not everyone who you want to help you is going to want to help you, right? And then it also takes time to cultivate that intimacy and trust. So you have to make it a priority starting now if you haven't already, and to be intentional about it and be patient and consistent about it over time if you want to lead and influence. Another cultural norm is about the ethos or the feel of the business world here in America. It's less altruistic, more competitive than in China and other cultures. It's less about the collective good and more about what's best for you individually. It's less dependent upon achieving consensus and relies more on independent decision-making. Now, this is not to say that collaboration and teamwork aren't important. They're obviously very important. But this difference in ethos requires you to make sure that people understand your unique value. Not just what your team is doing, but what you as an individual are doing. And this competitiveness is particularly important now in the current climate of layoffs. I don't know if any of you have been affected by this, but as managers are making decisions about who they're going to retain, they must value you and your contributions appropriately. So you can't be afraid to stand out or draw attention to yourself and your work. Also, you shouldn't hold yourself back. Yali described a situation where she was having a meeting with one of her managers, and they were talking about next steps on a project, and her manager told her, you don't have to get my permission to do what you think is right. And that feedback made Yali realize that she had been kind of deferring to her manager the way that she would defer to her parents. Waiting for validation or waiting for explicit instructions. And she wasn't doing it intentionally, but it conveyed a lack of confidence and a lack of leadership potential. And once she understood that she was not only expected but empowered to make her own decisions, she says that she's felt a lot more free at work. So there's a difference in the feel of an organization, and there's also differences in communication in corporate America. From what I understand, Chinese communication style is more reserved, more indirect. Deference and saving face are very important. In American business communications, you're expected to be more expressive and transparent, bold, and straightforward. And we must work on communicating effectively, because if we want to effectively lead others, we need to build relationships with them, develop rapport, communicate openly, demonstrate empathy. Yali says that her natural approach with others is that she's not likely to talk about herself with others. She says she works in a very specialized field and she kind of assumes that people won't be interested in what she's doing. So she usually facilitates conversations about other people. What are the other people doing versus talking about herself? But over time, she's realized that people want to know her personally. And for her thriving and effectiveness, people need to know her personally. She says she's also been reluctant to share what she needs. If she's having a problem. She says she's noticed people like herself kind of have a lot of self-criticism. We have very high standards for ourselves and we are worried about communicating when we're having a problem or we need help. And like I said, I can certainly relate to that. I wonder if you can. Over time, she's had to get used to speaking up. She realizes that expressing herself helps her connect with other people. And it doesn't necessarily reflect negatively on her when she requests help or amidst a struggling. It actually makes her feel more human and more relatable. So I've just shared with you some of the different cultural norms here in corporate America. And I know I've been talking for quite a while already. So I want to take a little bit of break from me talking. I'd like you to turn to your neighbor, just the person you're sitting next to, or maybe if there are 3 people, and just share for a moment if you have experienced or observed any of these cultural norms, or if there's another different cultural norm that you have observed here in the US being different from what you've experienced in the past. So just go ahead and just share. I'll just give you a minute or 2 and just talk about the cultural norms that you've observed here in corporate America. Okay? Okay, I'll give you just a few more minutes to wrap up. Okay, I'm going to keep on going. I want to make sure that we get through everything. So sorry to interrupt, but please continue to talk about this. I'm sorry to have to cut you off. You'll have more time to talk about this later, for sure. But I just wanted to have a conversation because I think that there are clearly lots of different cultural norms out there in the business world here. And we must accept and adopt those cultural norms if we want to achieve our goal of thriving in business. Now, to be clear, I'm talking about adaptation, not assimilation. Assimilation is what my parents tried to do, okay? They were much more concerned with trying to fit in, making others feel comfortable with them, to try to be like them, and to kind of try to change their identity to be like them. And that is not healthy, and it's not necessary. So that's not what I'm saying. Accepting and adopting cultural norms is adaptation. Understanding and working out the differences in expectations. It's about helping you feel comfortable with others and helping you determine when and if you need to adjust how you show up, what you say, what you do, so that you can influence and lead others. For example, to adapt to the cultural norms that Yao Li has faced, she has intentionally sought out opportunities to make presentations about her work at industry conferences. And she's told me it's a lot of hard work and it's really nerve-wracking. And, at first when she started doing it, she was like really nervous and she wasn't sure she had made the right decision. But she's ended up being able to travel to like Las Vegas and Hawaii and make these presentations. She's got really great feedback on them. And she's told me that this experience has helped her not only understand how better to communicate the value of the work that she's doing, but it's also raised her profile, not only in the industry, but at her company. And so she has successfully adapted to the cultural norms in the business world here well. And so again, I want to emphasize that learning to adapt to cultural norms to enable you to thrive is not about changing who you are at your core, okay? I always say you do you. And as the author Oscar Wilde has famously advised, be yourself. Everyone else is taken. And it's true. Plus, as a person of faith, I will share with you that I believe that God created each of you in a very unique and special way. The Bible says that each of you are wonderfully made. And God has put in each of you the potential for great influence. Remember, influence, leadership is really what we're going for. And God wants you to have a positive influence on everyone and everything around you. So if you want to develop and steward influence, you need to accept and adopt the cultural norms in business and live out that full potential that God has given to you. Again, not by changing who you are, but adapting to the cultural norms. So that requires you to change how you think and act. In other words, if you want to be a great leader, you must first begin by leading yourself. And this concept of self-leadership is the ability to direct your own thoughts and actions to achieve your goals and to build a life in which you thrive. Leading yourself involves being self-aware, developing new skill sets and new mindsets, and motivating yourself to make decisions and act. Before you can expect to lead others, you must lead yourself. And so that means that you have a decision. You need to decide whether or not you're going to change the way you think and act. Whether or not you believe you can change the way you think and act. Whether or not you have a growth mindset. I don't know if you've heard this term, growth mindset. It's a concept that was popularized by the Stanford professor, Dr. Carol Dweck. And Carol has been researching human development for decades. And her findings indicate that some people have a fixed mindset. They believe their abilities can't be changed, so they don't try to get better. Other people hold a growth mindset. They believe that their abilities can change with practice, and so they do just that. They practice. If you have a fixed mindset, you think that you are either destined to be successful or you're not. But if you have a growth mindset, you're eager to learn, get feedback, and know that that feedback will help you get better, and believe that you can succeed. Many people tend to put us in a box. And over time, we might believe that this is just the way we are. But the research shows that if you embrace challenges and change and practice getting better, you will. So that's what I mean by you have a decision to make. Whether or not you are going to lead yourself first so that you can thrive in business. And you must decide, because it takes hard work, dedication, commitment, perseverance, and frankly, you might just think it's too much. You know, you might think, oh, well, I just have way too much to work on, or you might choose to just wait and see what happens, or hope things get better. And it's better off for you to decide now whether or not you want to go on this journey. I don't want to waste your time. We can all just get coffee and have fun, right? I don't want to waste my time. So you have to decide. But by the mere fact that you're here early on a holiday day, right, taking up your whole holiday weekend to be here, tells me that you are dedicated to doing what it takes to get better, doing what it takes to thrive and to lead. So if you're with me, I'll guess that you've made that decision, and I want to share with you, in the rest of the time we have left, 3 leadership actions, a leadership action plan that will enable you to lead yourself first and then lead others. So the actions are know ourselves, grow ourselves, and serve others. And these 3 actions will set ourselves up to achieve our goal to thrive in business. So we have to start with knowing ourselves, because we have to know who we are, we have to know what we believe in, what we want to achieve, before we can help others answer that question for themselves. So who are we really? Well, Peter Drucker can help us figure that out. Peter was one of the best known and most widely influential leaders and writers on the subject of management, theory, and practice. He wrote nearly 40 books on leadership and management. He wrote this article for the Harvard Business Review called Managing Oneself. And the article laid out a series of questions to ask yourself to know yourself and to help you become a better leader. And so I've adapted those questions based on my own experience into the following 5 questions that will help us truly understand who we are. The first is, what is my purpose and values? We have to start with our why. Why do we exist? What drives us and our goals? What do we truly care about? Now, of course, we want to specify where we want to go, what we want to do, but it's best to start with our motivation before we get into our behaviors. So we need to know our purpose. And then we also want to specify our core values, our how. Our core values are the guiding principles that shape our actions, behaviors, and decision-making. Our values are the way we show up regardless of the situation. The second question to know ourselves is to identify and articulate our strengths. And I think, did you have your strengths session already? I think you might have yesterday, or there was someone who talked about strengths before. Strengths are your unique talents, your natural patterns of thinking, feeling, behaving that enable you to have influence. What do you do more easily and more powerfully than anyone else? So what are my strengths? Then how do I learn and perform? Different people learn, perform, and work differently. And you will achieve different results by working in different ways. So for example, we should ask ourselves, am I a reader or am I a listener? Do I perform well under stress and tight timelines, or do I need a highly structured and predictable environment? Do I work best in a big organization or a small one? Another question is, where do I belong? Or perhaps, where don't I belong? And this is less about belonging to a place and more about belonging to a community of people. We were created to be with each other. God wired us for community. We need each other. We cannot thrive on our own. So we need to ask ourselves, where do we belong? Where do I feel accepted? Where am I needed? Where can I be myself? Who brings out the best in me, and who needs me to bring out the best in them? And finally, to know ourselves, we have to ask, what should I contribute? Given my strengths, my purpose and values, the way that I perform and learn, how can I make the greatest contribution to what needs to be done? What is most needed in the situations that I care about the most? What results have to be achieved to make the difference that I want to make in the world? In the workshop that will follow this talk, you'll have an opportunity to go through all of these questions. So for now, just simply know that the first step to leading yourself and others is to know yourself. The second action in your leadership action plan to thrive in business is to grow ourselves. And this is where you must tap into that growth mindset that I was talking about and determine how you want to improve. And I invite you to consider how you might grow in every dimension of yourself, from your head to your eyes, your ears, your heart, your hands. I'm going to go through each one of these. First, your head. How we think. I invite you to consider how you might grow in the way that you think about other people. You see, in business, we can choose to interact with others in different paradigms, different mental models, okay? And one of the mental models, the default, is usually win-lose. This is an authoritarian point of view. It's a way of interacting with people that basically says, I get my way, you don't get yours. And this win-lose mentality is ingrained in our nature, and it's definitely reinforced by our parents, our peers, and sports, etc. And certainly there is a place for win-lose thinking in truly competitive, low-trust situations, but most of life is not a game per se. And thinking that you must win and someone else must lose is harmful to yourself and to everyone you interact with. Another paradigm of thinking about the way you interact with others is, I lose, you win. And you might see yourself in this paradigm if you're quick to try to please others or try to appease them. You'd rather repress your own wants and feelings and capitulate to others to avoid conflict. This is also not a healthy and productive way to interact with others. And there are other interaction paradigms that are just as problematic because in each you are pitting yourself against someone else instead of working with them and having a positive influence on them. The most effective relationships depend on a win-win paradigm. Win-win constantly seeks mutual benefit in all interactions. It helps us arrive at agreements or solutions that help all who are involved, where all parties feel good about the decision and are committed to activating it. That's what true leadership aims to achieve. Everyone wins. Thinking that only one party can win is fundamentally flawed. It's based on exerting power over others rather than expressing principles about work, through work with others. Win-win is based on the belief that there's plenty for everybody, and your success is not achieved at the expense or exclusion of the success of others. So thinking win-win in your head is a key starting point in our action to grow ourselves into great leaders. Then there are our eyes. I mean, what do we look at? What do we focus on? Effective leaders are more focused on others, less on themselves. The theologian C.S. Lewis explains this well in his definition of humility. He says, humility is not thinking less of yourself, putting yourself down, thinking poorly of yourself, being overly self-critical. Humility is just thinking about yourself less frequently. So in other words, where are you looking most of the time? When an opportunity is revealed, do you immediately look for how you might take advantage of it? Or do you consider who else might benefit as well? Conversely, when a problem arises, are you more concerned with how you are affected? Or do you think about the impact on others and how you might mitigate it or help them? I invite you to grow yourself into leadership thinking by thinking of yourself less. And I will say this is a tough growth area. I think that we're all kind of wired to be self-oriented. I struggle with this a lot, but I've found that my ability to be others-focused depends on whether I feel secure myself. If I think it's all up to me, I have to do the work, I'm the only one who cares, then I'm likely to prioritize myself. But if I know that God is in control, and I do, and I believe that He will protect and provide for me, then I'm free to direct my focus to others. So I invite you to consider how you might tap into that freedom also. The next invitation to grow is in our ears. How we listen to others specifically. Listening is about understanding. And you might feel like you are often misunderstood, and I don't just mean the language thing. I mean that you probably think people don't get you, they don't understand you, they misjudge you, they make assumptions about you. And frankly, you may be right in some cases, but I encourage you first to be more concerned about whether you really understand others. Do you really get the people who you work with? Do you feel them? If you want to interact effectively with someone to influence them, you first need to understand them. I always say communication is a two-way street, so start on your side of the road. And so when you seek to listen, seeking first to understand others, you listen differently. You listen well. You listen with empathy. If you're like most people, myself included, we do not listen with the intent to understand. We listen with the intent to reply. When someone else is speaking, we're waiting for our turn to speak next. And we filter everything we hear based on our lens and project our perspectives on others. Instead, if we want to lead effectively, we want to listen empathetically. Listen with the intent to understand, really understand them, to see them, to want to know them. For example, when you ask someone, hey, how are you doing today? Do you really care? Do you really listen to their response? Do you ask a probing or clarifying question to follow up to make sure you truly understand how they're doing? I want you just to practice this for a moment. Again, I want you to turn to your neighbor and I want you just to ask each other, how are you doing? And then answer each other and practice listening so that you can truly understand them. Again, just take a moment, turn to each other. How are you doing? Talk to each other. Okay, thank you for practicing. Thanks. I love how you guys were really looking at each other. That's awesome. Empathetic listen, it's hard. You have to really concentrate. I also found that a lot of times you have to, when you ask someone how you're doing, they're like, oh, fine. You really have to ask them a follow-up. No, really, how are you doing? Right? Really, yeah. Doing so is a gift. Empathetic listening is probably the best gift you can give to someone else. And it's one of the qualities that distinguishes great leaders. And so this empathetic listening is not only about listening with your ears, but it's also listening with your eyes. Like I said, I really liked how you were looking at each other. It also means listening with your heart. And so speaking of heart, this is the next dimension I want to talk about in growing ourselves. In our hearts, what do we desire most? Success or significance? Success is what we get when we accomplish a goal or objective, and it usually is measured by material wealth or status or power. Significance is the impact that we have on others and on the world around us, and it's measured by the positive difference we make in other people's lives. And it's usually the result of using our wealth or power or status for the benefit of others. So I invite you to grow into a great leader by setting your heart on significance. And a good way to grow in your desire for significance is to ask yourself what you'd want people to say at your funeral or memorial service after you die. Now, I know this sounds a little bit morbid, but if you work towards that, it's very clarifying. Don't you want people to talk about you as someone who was significant, a person of significance? Someone who has created value for everyone else. You know, success creates value for yourself. Significance creates value for everyone else. Success can be fleeting, especially if you are accomplishment-oriented, achievement-oriented like I am. You know, we just achieve something, we move on to the next thing. But significance is more likely to have a lasting impact. It's likely to make a real difference. And it's natural to want to be successful, but if we want to grow into great leadership, we must cultivate a heart for significance. The last invitation for today to grow is best realized when we acknowledge that there are lots of questions, these uns. There are lots of unknowns, uncertainties, unusual circumstances, and unusual people. And in the face of all these uns, our natural instinct is to try to control. Control, we think, will help remove the unknowns, reduce the uncertainty, overcome the unusual. And so we seek to control the variables, seek to control the circumstances, seek to control the people around us. And in leadership opportunities, when we control, we try to use our power to direct people's behavior and try to control what everyone else is doing. This is the typical top-down leadership approach, and it doesn't work, or it doesn't work for very long. Effective leadership comes not from seeking to control others, but to serve them. And that's the last action that I invite you to take as you pursue your leadership to thrive, so you can thrive, and that is to lead others by serving them. The most effective leadership is servant leadership. It's a concept popularized by Robert Greenleaf in this book. And you can see even in the subtitle, he says that servant leadership is the path to greatness. Now, to explain what servant leadership is, let's start with what serving is not. This is a list of actions that the leadership guru Marshall Goldsmith says are stupid things leaders do. And I love this list. And so I just want you to take a moment. This is something you can just do yourself, just in your head. I want you to look through this list and identify like the one or two actions that when your manager or your boss does this, it annoys you. It is like the worst thing. And then I want you to also go through the list and ask yourself, which of these do I do? Right? So just take a moment, like I said, just to yourself, go through this list. Which of these is most annoying when someone else does to you? And then which, if you're honest, do you find yourself doing? If not all of these are clear, I can explain them later, but at least hopefully there are a couple that you can relate to. I will share very transparently that I find myself passing judgment at number 3 and number 5. Always when someone says something and me being like, no, or but, or however, really trying to like contradict, right? Those are my things. So I'm just being honest. right? We all have bad tendencies when we are interacting with others, when we're trying to lead others. The good news is that all these actions can be mitigated if we understand that our role, our calling, is to serve others, not to control them, not to tell them what to do, not to manipulate them, not to use them, but to serve them. So servant leadership is basically just starting by thinking positively about others, assuming others' best intentions. Assume that they are worthy of your trust and respect. Focus on other people's strengths and their contributions. Identify what their passions are, what their goals are, and then consider how you can help them lean into those passions and achieve those goals. Ask yourself how you can help others grow. What do they need from you to develop? How can you help them thrive? Because if you help others thrive, you'll most certainly will thrive yourself. And this brings me back to Satya Nadella. Remember I talked about him earlier, the CEO of Microsoft? He embodies this action, serve others, as well as the first two actions in our leadership action plan, know ourselves and grow ourselves. And so let me explain by relaying 3 quotes from Satya, starting with the first action, to know ourselves. Satya has said, "My biggest strength is my ability to every day to recognize my weaknesses." That's a reflection of how well he knows himself, and he recognizes where he needs to grow. And he's not afraid to admit that he needs to grow or that when he's made a mistake. For example, I read about once he was being interviewed at a large tech conference, and in response to a difficult question, he gave an answer that immediately triggered a lot of criticism, especially on social media. It was something that he really shouldn't have said. And as soon as he found out about the reaction, he immediately, like later that day, offered an apology. He said, "I answered that question completely wrong." And then he offered a revision to his answer. And then he said, "I came to this conference to learn, and I certainly learned a valuable lesson." And so I feel like that's a great example of knowing yourself. Satya took the time to assess himself, admit that this one area that he was talking about was not a strength, and that he was willing to make a change, apologize, and then move on. So know yourself. The second quote from Satya speaks to how he grows himself. He says, "My personal philosophy and my passion, developed over time and through exposure to many different experiences, is to connect new ideas with a growing sense of empathy for other people." This shows that Satya, even one of the most powerful, successful leaders of our time, he continues to learn and try to improve, to grow. In one area, empathy. And so he doesn't just kind of think, oh, he's at the top of his game, I can kind of sit back and coast. Instead, he leans into this growth mindset. He's always growing, and he encourages everyone around him to grow. And finally, on the third action, to serve others, Satya says that that's what leadership is all about, bringing out the best in everyone. He sees his role is to serve others by helping them to thrive. So those are the 3 actions you take to become a great leader and achieve our goal of thriving. Know ourselves by asking and answering those 5 key questions, starting with what is my purpose and values. Number 2, grow ourselves by using the win-win paradigm of thinking in our heads, focusing our eyes and attention on others before ourselves, listening with empathy so that we truly understand others, desiring significance in our hearts more than success, and seeking to use our hands to serve. And that's the third action. Lead others by serving them. Think positively about others and help them to thrive. With these actions, becoming a great leader and thriving in business is possible. But again, this is hard work. And you will undoubtedly face some challenges. So I want to close by offering a few words of caution. First, you will almost certainly make some mistakes and quite possibly even fail at times. That's normal. Satya did it. All leaders do it. What happens next is the most important thing. Are you going to learn from your mistakes and failures? Or are you going to allow these bumps in the road to stop you? I encourage you to see mistakes and failures as a necessary part of growth and continue on. Also, as you implement these actions, you may experience imposter syndrome, meaning you doubt yourself. And again, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this term, but it talks about how despite you being successful, you may feel like you're a fraud or a phony. You may question your abilities. You might think that, it was just luck, or that you're imagining things. What am I doing here? That's what imposter syndrome is, and practically everyone experiences it at some point. So when you seek to grow yourself, you will most certainly experience it. The only real solution to this is a secure identity. You must be convinced that you matter, that you have value. It's not just okay for you to be who you are. You have a right to be who you are. You're in the room for a reason, each one of you. Now, you might get the secure identity from your family, your friends, your faith. As I said, as a Christian, my secure identity comes from knowing that I'm a beloved child of God. And frankly, I would like that to be yours as well. But whatever the source, ensure that you derive your identity from something more secure than what other people think of you or what you think of yourself. My last word of caution is the possibility that others might not come along with you as you grow. Not everyone will follow you. Not everyone wants to be led by you. And just as you need to determine where you belong, some people may determine that they don't belong following you. And they might opt out, and that is completely okay. In fact, it's great, because if you're driving the bus, you want to make sure you have the right people on the bus. So it's okay if people move on. Now, there are some people in your life, like parents, friends, or partners, who you don't want to move on. But they might not accept or approve of the changes in the growth that you're undertaking either. They'd rather you stay the way they've known you. And that can be disappointing. It can be discouraging. But again, I encourage you to consider that this is okay. You are on a journey, and different people will be close to you on different parts of your journey. So be sure to invite those people along with you, explain why the changes you're making are important, and then celebrate and draw near to them when they come along, and then hold them more loosely when they don't. Just understand that it is a journey. Focus on controlling what you can and accept what you can't, because that's how you get to your goal to thrive in business. And remember, thriving means a life of security and stability. It means achieving more than you ever thought possible and enjoying it more than you think you deserve. And thriving means leading a life of great leadership in business and beyond. So before we transition to our workshop, I wanted to lead you with some resources on leadership that you might want to look into further. First, there are many books out there, but the three most influential on my understanding and practice of leadership are, number one, Good to Great by Jim Collins. He researched great companies and great leaders and then kind of reverse engineered how they sustain success over time. Second is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, which introduces exactly that, habits, things that you can do on a daily basis so that you can learn how to know and grow yourself. And then the last book, The First 90 Days by Michael Watson. It's a great resource when you are starting a new job. I give it to everyone who tells me that they are starting a new job. So I encourage you to check out these books. I have tons of other recommendations, but I wanted to limit it to those 3. Also, there are a lot of leadership resources on my website, deniseleeyohn.com. If you go to blog or resources, I've written a lot. And I encourage you to follow or connect with me on LinkedIn so you can get all of my content. If you do connect with me on LinkedIn, make sure you mention that we met at this conference, because I don't know about you, but I get invitations from all these people. I'm like, who is this person? So just remind me of who you are, okay? So we're going to go through these questions, and what I have asked your career coaches to do is for you to focus on 3 of the questions. I want you to focus on work through all 5, but we only have like an hour, and so just do 3, maybe 15, 20 minutes for each one of the 3. But I want everyone to do the first one, which is, what is my purpose and what are my core values? And I thought it might be helpful for me to share in some examples of purpose. So one of them is from Oprah Winfrey. Hopefully you all know who Oprah is. And she says that her purpose is to be a teacher, to be known for inspiring my students to be more than they thought they could be. So whether she is interviewing famous people on TV, whether she's running her $1.4 billion media company, whether she's acting or writing books or whatever, she's always seeking to be a teacher. Another example is actor John Cho. You might know him from the Harold and Kumar movies. He was also in Star Trek or whatever. And he says his purpose is to define what an American is. He wants to kind of break the Asian stereotypes, and he says he wants to do that until it will no longer be necessary to do so. So he's using his gifts and his talents to reshape people's perceptions of Asians. So I just encourage you, be bold, kind of think big. I think the bigger your purpose, the more aspirational it is, the more exciting it can be. I think the better. So, and then your core values, you want to talk about, like, how are you going to do things? And one of the things that I always ask myself is, will I always do? What will I never do? And what are my principles? Where do I draw the line? That's really important. I feel like I want to share with you my core values. This could take us in a totally different direction. So let me just say one thing. When people do their core values, a lot of times they say, well, I value integrity, or I value kindness or generosity. And those things are very important values. I just don't find them to be really instructive. You want your values, you want to be able to think about your values when you have a tough decision to make. Like when you're speaking with someone who you disagree with. And you want to go back to your values and say, how will I show up in this conversation? And so I wanted to share with you my core values. Like they are, what I try to do is I contrast 2 desirable values so that it's very clear what I'm trading off. So like, for example, the second one is I pursue centeredness in God versus work-life balance. A lot of people, work-life balance may be a great thing. Some people may say that's my goal. I don't know if balance is really possible. I feel like being centered in God is. And so that's why my core values are very much like trying to contrast these 2 things, or I'm more purposeful than I am productive. So just think about how you can uniquely describe what you value that will help you make decisions, make hard decisions. And then we have the learn and perform, the other questions, where do I belong? And I have some examples or call-outs, some things that you can refer to on the sheets that specify that. Can I share one last story? Is that okay? Okay. This is what I want to share with you, and this is the story about my mom. Okay. She was Chinese. Like many of you, she came to the U.S. for school. She got her master's degree in chemical engineering from Purdue University. She married my father and raised me and my sister. You saw the picture of me and my sister when we were young. She had a lifelong career at Monsanto, which was a large company. But she always put her family first. She took lesser jobs so that my dad could actually thrive in his role, and so that she could provide this comfortable life for me and my sister. So she didn't reach for big goals or assignments at Monsanto. And that wasn't because she wasn't capable or she wasn't ambitious, but she was trying to fit into this mold of being this good Chinese wife and this good Chinese mother, and trying to fulfill the expectations that her parents had put on her, and fulfill the expectations of the education that they had provided for her. She knew she was created for much more, but she didn't pursue that until she retired. So after 30 years of being at Monsanto, she took early retirement and she became a travel agent. And she really blossomed. It was awesome. She was thriving because it allowed her to use all of her strengths. She loved the people she worked for. And she just really enjoyed serving people. Unfortunately, breast cancer took her life way too early. And so she did not get to enjoy this newfound source of joy for very long. And so I keep this picture of my mom in my bedroom. I look at it every morning to remind me about the little time we have here on earth, and to motivate me to not allow others' expectations and needs to diminish what I feel called to. When I look at this picture, I remember how important it is to lean into my passions and to do what I love and to pursue what I believe God has called me to do. And so that is my prayer for you all, that you will remember that God created you uniquely, and that you will be able to enjoy and become all that He created you to be. And that is what true thriving is all about. So thank you very much for allowing me to share that story and share everything with you. I really appreciate it.